Good evening. My name is Larissa Shasko. I am here to moderate, but I'm going to just start with some opening remarks. So good evening and welcome to the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy 4th Annual Robertson Lecture, From Farm to Fork, Saskatchewan's Role in the Future of Food Security and Innovation, featuring Dr. Sylvan Charlebois, Professor, Director, Agri-Food Analytics Lab, Dalhousie University. So my name is Larissa Shasko, and I'm a PhD student here at JSGS. I'm honored to be your MC for tonight's Robertson Lecture. So I am in studying here, actually technically with the University of Saskatchewan, but I did my master's with the University of Regina here at Johnson Shoyama, and my undergrad with the University of Regina in political science. So I'm really excited to be here at tonight's lecture. The topic that we're discussing tonight is fascinating, I think, to everyone here, especially as someone who was born and raised in Saskatchewan. But I personally study climate change, sustainability, nuclear energy policy, and these are very complex systems. But I think that Dr. Charlebois has me trumped there in this case with the complexity of our food system and his vast level of knowledge. So I'm very excited to be here tonight and for the conversation that we're about to have. So I would like to acknowledge that while today's event is taking place in Regina and online, JSGS's physical home is located on Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories, the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the traditional homeland of the Métis. We are glad to welcome those of you joining us today from across Turtle Island and make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the land you reside on and think about and express gratitude for the place and for the people who have safeguarded it throughout time. I'll pause for a moment so we can all take a minute to think about actions we can identify to actively engage in reconciliation to honor the land and its people. Knowing that we have guests joining us from across the country, I would be remiss if I did not say a few brief remarks about our event host, the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy, or JSGS. JSGS is a national hub for advanced study and research in public policy and administration. With campuses at both the University of Saskatchewan and the University of Regina, JSGS's graduate and executive development programs build knowledge, skills, and competencies for success in government, nonprofits, cooperatives, and credit unions. Nationally recognized for our professional training and research excellence, JSGS is responding to the needs of public sector partners, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit organizations, governments, and communities who are confronting economic, social, and environmental issues. One of JSGS's research areas that speaks to me, and likely many of you joining us today for the Robertson Lecture, is the school's focus on science and innovation policy. Scientific knowledge, when properly and clearly shared with policymakers and the media, can greatly improve the quality of the human experience. It is critical that the findings scientists make through rigorous discipline and proven protocols are not misinterpreted or misunderstood in order to preserve the integrity of scientific leadership, public policy, and communications work. It was this line of thinking that led to the creation of the Robertson Lecture series. Before I turn it over to JSGS's Executive Director, Dr. Laline Bridal, I would like to take care of a few housekeeping items that will help our event run more smoothly. For those in the room, if you need to exit the room, you can find exits on both sides of the room, just this way, if you're like a flight attendant. We kindly ask that all attendees ensure that their cell phones are muted. Hopefully I muted mine. And if you have a question for our speaker during the Q&A, please make your way towards the microphone located in the center aisle, and you will be called on when it's time to pose your question. The microphone's back there. When it's time for the Q&A, it'll be easy to find, and we will make sure that you get the microphone too. For those who are joining online, if you have a question for the speaker, please email it to jsgs.events@uregina.ca with the subject of Robertson Lecture question, and we will pose the question on your behalf. And if you have any logistical issues during today's presentation, please don't hesitate to send a message to jsgs.events@uregina.ca. And the format for today's event is as follows. Following the opening remarks, our speaker, Dr. Sylvan Charlebois, will present for about 30 minutes. Following that, Dr. Charlebois will engage in a fireside chat, after which we'll open it up to audience Q&A. We'd really like this to be as interactive and as much of a dialogue as possible today. So please do not hold back your questions. This is your chance to ask the food professor your burning questions today. And following, for those that are asking questions, please ensure that they are concise and to the point so that our speaker can respond to as many questions as possible. So definitely try to keep that in mind so that we can make sure that everyone has a chance to talk and that we have as much time as possible to have this conversation. So I'd now like to welcome JSGS Executive Director, Dr. Lillian Birdall, to bring greetings.
Thank you, Larissa. Well, thank you, Larissa. And on behalf of JSGS, I'd like to welcome all of you for what promises to be an engaging and thoughtful discussion. The Robertson Lecture was made possible by a generous donation from the late Dr. Bev Robertson, his wife Elaine, and their family. Dr. Robertson was recruited to the University of Regina's physics department in 1969 to work on an automated X-ray diffractometer, and that is the right word, and was involved in the development of crystallographic software before he retired in 1997. He was later conferred as a professor emeritus in 2003. He was also deeply involved in establishing the University of Regina as a standalone academic institution rather than it simply being an extension of the University of Saskatchewan. Right now, the University of Regina is celebrating its 50th, and so he was a big key part in that. His tireless work and diplomacy was essential to the fruition of the Saskatchewan Science Centre, and in addition to his academic career, some may know you in the Regina community as being the owner of Bushwhacker Brewing Company Limited. Is anyone familiar with Bushwhacker? All right. So in 2014, Dr. Robertson gifted $500,000 to the Johnson-Shoyama Graduate School to assist in the creation of the Center for the Study of Science and Innovation Policy and the establishment of the Robertson Student Fellowships, which support graduate student research in the area of science and public policy, and the Robertson Lecture. I'd like to acknowledge that Larissa is one of our Robertson student fellows, and we are very grateful to have her and to have this support for her. So as I just noted, this year the Robertson Lecture is part of the University of Regina's 50th anniversary celebrations. So July 1st, 2024 marks the 50th anniversary of the University of Regina becoming an independent degree-granting institution, although the U of R's roots as Regina College from right here on the College Avenue campus date back more than a century. The U of R is celebrating all year long through events and many other activities to bring alumni and community together. And if you'd like to join the celebrations, please check out the U of R's 50th anniversary info hub, which is accessible on the U of R's homepage at uregina.ca. One quick note before I turn things back over. This is the first time we've done the Robertson Lecture in person. So this is the fourth one, so you can do the math as when we started. And the fact that you're all here in person and participating in these policy discussions and debates and making the time for this means a tremendous amount to me and my colleagues. So I'd like to thank you for your engagement tonight. And with that, I'll turn things back over to Larissa to introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Lillian. I now have the honor of introducing our 2024 Robertson Lecture speaker. Dr. Sylvain Charlebois is a professor in food distribution and policy in the Faculty of Management at Dalhousie University in Halifax. He is also the Senior Director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at the same university. He is as well the former Dean of the Faculty of Management at Dalhousie University. Before joining Dalhousie, he was affiliated with the University of Guelph's Errol, am I pronouncing that right? Errol Food Institute, which he co-founded. Known as the food professor, his current research interest lies in the broad area of food distribution, security, and safety. He is one of the world's most cited scholars in food supply chain management, food value chains, and traceability. Since 2020, he co-hosts the Food Professor podcast, discussing issues in the food service, grocery, and restaurant industries. The podcast is ranked in the top 10 most listened management podcasts in Canada. And it's really great. I've checked it in the last couple of days, and I've got to say, you should check it out too. Every year since 2012, he has published the now highly anticipated Canadian Food Price Report, which provides an overview of food price trends for the coming year. He has authored 7 books on global food systems, notably one titled Poutine Nation, exploring the journey of the iconic Canadian dish from its humble beginning to international success. He has also published over 750 peer-reviewed journal articles in several academic and professional publications. Furthermore, his research has been featured in several newspapers and media groups, including The Economist, The New York Times, The Boston Globe, The Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, BBC, NBC, ABC, Fox News, Foreign Affairs, The Globe and Mail, The National Post, and The Toronto Star. Dr. Charlebois is an editor for the Trends in Food Science Technology Journal. He works with many startups and supports many organizations as a special advisor, including some publicly traded companies. Dr. Charlebois is also a member of the Scientific Council of the Business Scientific Institute, based in Luxembourg. He conducts policy analysis, evaluation, and demonstration projects for government agencies and major foundations focusing on agricultural policies and community development, both in Canada and in development settings. Dr. Charlebois is a member of the Global Food Traceability Center's Advisory Board based in Washington, D.C., and a member of the National Scientific Committee of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, CFIA, in Ottawa. He has testified on several occasions before parliamentary committees on food policy-related issues as an expert witness. You can see why. He has been asked to act as an advisor on food and agricultural policies in many Canadian provinces, in the United States, Brazil, Austria, Italy, France, Belgium, China, Great Britain, Finland, and the Netherlands. I think we are in for a very engaging discussion, and I'll now turn over the floor to Dr. Sylvain Charlebois.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You didn't have to read the whole thing, by the way. Yeah, it's embarrassing. Do you guys know there's a debate tonight? What are you guys doing here? Like you guys are gardeners, aren't you? You want to know tricks about food, how to grow food? No, I appreciate you guys coming. I know a lot of you guys. For me, it feels like homecoming. Regina has a special place in my heart, in the heart of our family. We have 3 of our kids were born here, and we live in Halifax. But I was telling to some students and faculty today, Halifax is just, Regina can't be replaced. It's just unique. It's a great place to be. And when you land, there's a smell. Well, I'm not talking about kerosene here, not jet fuel, but the smell of the city. Anyways, I feel at home here. Absolutely. So thank you so much for inviting me as keynote. And Bev Robertson is a guy I knew. Yes, I've been to Bushwhackers more than once. In fact, I would recommend perhaps to have this lecture at Bushwhackers next time. Why not? But here tonight, I'm here to reflect on Saskatchewan's role in agriculture, and not just for our dishes, our plates here in Canada, but what is Saskatchewan's role around the world? Do you feel proud about Saskatchewan's contribution to the world when it comes to food security? You should. You should. Do you think that Canada and Saskatchewan acts like a super powerhouse when it comes to food security, when it comes to agriculture? Yeah, I see. I would say not really. I think we got a lot of work to do. We do a lot of things, a lot of great things. We make a difference in a lot of people's lives around the world. You go to China and they talk about canola. Yes, Canada oil. And they think about Saskatchewan. Think about fertilizers, potash. Saskatchewan is amazing. The year I left in 2010, BHP Billiton tried an hostile takeover of Potash Corp. You guys remember that? That was incredible. So that was happening, moved to Guelph, my new home. But I heard that Brad Wall was actually speaking at the Royal York Hotel downtown Toronto. So I bought a table for the faculty and brought 7 of my colleagues to Toronto to listen to Brad Wall. And as he was speaking on stage, I was looking at my colleagues' faces, and I could tell that they were asking themselves, who the hell is that? And I said, well, that's the Premier of Saskatchewan. Like he's a believer. I've met Brad many times in the speaker circuit. He's a believer. I am a believer in Saskatchewan as well, even though I don't live here anymore. I haven't stopped watching, observing the province's contribution. And don't let anybody tell you that Saskatchewan is, underneath or not contributing enough. It is. It's just really, it's the attitude that I think needs to change. It's the vision. And of course, it's not just about Saskatchewan. I think there's a lot of criticism that I need to direct towards Ottawa. We don't have a very strong food policy in Canada. We don't. We have CAP's budget is about $5 billion Canadian. The equivalent to the US is called the Farm Bill, being negotiated right now. And of course, the presidential election is stalling things, but the next Farm Bill is likely worth about 1.6 trillion US dollars, which is more than Canada's budget, total budget. Now, you may disagree with the Farm Bill, but at least they have a vision. And I think this is really what's holding Canada and Saskatchewan back, as far as I'm concerned, a common vision. And we may have disagreements in terms of how to feed the world, how to make a difference, how to deal with food security, food autonomy, greenhouses, urban agriculture, regenerative agriculture, all the things that we're hearing. We may disagree with a lot of supply management, the wheat board, all those things that really have divided Canadians. We may disagree with them, but at least with a vision, you can actually focus and move forward. And I think that's really what's missing right now. Saskatchewan is really making a huge contribution despite the lack of vision, I think. And we're doing our best. Yesterday we learned that we're about to enter a period of diplomatic entanglement with India. That's not new. It's going to happen. I was talking to Evan Bray on his show today, and people are concerned. It's going to happen. It's going to happen more often. It's like climate change. We need to deal with it. Doing nothing is not a solution. So to me, if you are to ask me what are the 2 things that represent a real threat to Saskatchewan's agriculture over the next 5 to 10 years, climate change by far, and geopolitics. And to a certain degree, we can do some things with climate change. You can mitigate risks. You can do a lot of things. But the rhetoric, and that's why I was in Ottawa last week testifying to Parliament. Oh my goodness, that experience was horrible. I mean, seriously, we need a reset in Parliament, and I don't care who wins. I think we need a reset. I was testifying, and there were points of order all the time between the Bloc and the Liberals and the Conservatives. It really got crazy. And of course, lots of discussion about which topic you think? The carbon tax. The carbon tax. We're in the middle of election here in Saskatchewan, and your premier has been very vocal about it. He loves the carbon tax, doesn't he? Yeah. Well, I think he sees himself as the anti-sea tax ambassador. And it's politics, I get it. But at the end of the day, what I think for Saskatchewan, what I think is going on for Saskatchewan or against Saskatchewan is this missed opportunity to see carbon as an opportunity. Not a threat, not a tax. We shouldn't think of carbon as the ability to change the weather. We should think of carbon markets, carbon credits as an opportunity to make money. The carbon market has tremendous potential. And if I can think of one province which can benefit from recognizing the power and the relevancy of a carbon market, it's Saskatchewan. And if we can actually, and I got some people in the room who can speak to that for sure, about carbon credits. I mean, some of the stuff going on right here in this city. Actually, I brought them. This is a carbon credit, an ESG carbon credit. Carbon RX is in the room, and this company on Victoria Street basically has designed this as a token, as a symbol that will represent opportunities down the road. So instead of you looking at carbon as a stick, which has been really the problem, which has pushed your premier to be against anything that Ottawa's doing, to an opportunity. So this was created to visualize the opportunity. And it was given to me yesterday, and I think it's a brilliant idea. We need more of that. So there's one for ESG standard and one ESG for First Nations as well. Beautiful. This is what we need to do. And these ideas are coming from Saskatchewan. And we need to be proud as much as possible. So I guess I'll stop here because I want to actually answer your question. But the bottom line to me is that I see tremendous opportunities in Saskatchewan. When I left Saskatchewan in 2010, there were few people working in the province. Now there are 14% more people working in the province, about 77,000 people more working in the province. The average in Canada is 19%. So yes, Saskatchewan didn't grow its labor force as much as Canada, but it did grow. Agriculture. There are 34% fewer people working in agriculture. But that's fine. The average in Canada is about 24%. Bigger farms, capacity, the industrialization of farming, I'm all for it. To be honest, a minus 34% is reassuring because when I talk to the Christian Heberts of the world out there farming Saskatchewan land, these guys are well equipped. They think about world markets and they know what they're doing. That's the kind of farmers you want, believe me, for food security. But the one stat that I really want to bring forward to you guys, since you're in the middle of election, is what profession has grown the most since 2010 when I left Saskatchewan? Do you know which profession has actually grown in terms of percentage the most since 2010? Yeah, no. Saskatchewan is a happy place, okay? Let's talk afterwards. It's healthcare. Healthcare, plus 47%. What's number two? science, plus 45%. That's interesting. And I can tell you, I do spend a lot more time at USask at the U of R now because I'm a foodie, and I do work a lot with my friends at USask, but the work being done there is amazing, you know? So when we think about vertical integration, when we think about manufacturing, when we think about value add, I think, okay, I think about AGT, sure. JGT basically, Murad created this portal to the world for a bunch of farmers, which is amazing. That's a powerhouse. But I also think about traits, plant science. You know, there's a lot of that going on right now. Drought-resistant canola. Tweaks you can make to plants so they can grow despite climate change. All that technology is being developed right here in this province, used around the world. So Saskatchewan's contribution is not just about supplying calories to the rest of the world. The new world is about supplying IP, intellectual property. That is what Saskatchewan is contributing way more than before. So on that note, I'll shut up and I'll answer your question. Back to you.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Was quite fascinating and a really great kickoff to the rest of our conversation. So a reminder to our audience members, if you have a question and are in the room, then you can make your way to the microphone and we will call on you when it's your turn to ask your question. But we're going to start with a little bit of a chat just to get things kicked off. So I actually had a really burning question, but you pretty much stole it right out of my mouth. I was going to ask you, if you could ask Saskatchewan politicians one question right now, since they decided to have the leadership debate right at this exact same time, what would that question be? So I still will pose that question, even though that you did actually mention quite a few really relevant points. But if you could ask them one question, Saskatchewan politicians, as of course as it relates to your area of research, or maybe you can go outside of that too. I'll give you that's freedom in this conversation. But what would that question be?
Well, I mean, it is a leaders' debate, and you're speaking to a lot of urban voters. I'd certainly talk about, the state of the cost of living. I mean, it's really critical. What we're seeing around the country is a shrinking middle class. I mean, let's be honest here. I do think that because of what's going on with food inflation and interest rates and mortgage rates and everything else in between, is that you basically have the recognition of two food economies, one for the wealthy and one for the less affluent. And the middle class is pushed towards the latter more and more. And that's a concern to me. And so when you look at retail sales, food retail sales, they're dropping. People are trading down. But restaurant sales are up. They're almost at a record high. So fine dining is up. I think the white cloth restaurants are doing very well because of business. Fast food is doing well. But the middle of the road restaurants aren't doing well. What I'm seeing are menu price freezes, restaurants trying to bring people back, the Kelseys, the Montanas. Those are the ones struggling a lot more because they rely on the middle class. And once you lose the middle class, it's hard to support a food economy and innovation as well.
Right.
So what I would ask the leaders is, how are you going to deal with the cost of living crisis and making sure that the middle class can eat properly? That's what I would ask.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Yeah, absolutely. I wish that they could hear this right now. We'll have to make sure that we get the message to them afterwards.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's a question about the cost of living.
Yes, I'd be surprised if there wasn't.
Debate tonight for sure, because
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's just a really critical. Saskatchewan, I would say, so your food inflation rate right now is at 2.4%, according to the CPI yesterday, which nobody really believes in, but that's okay. It's 2.4%. But in the Maritimes, we were severely hit by, inflation has been consistently above the national average. So we lived in Saskatchewan, we lived in Guelph, and in Halifax, it's much more expensive to buy food.
Right.
It's just a very difficult market to service. We're so far, and once you get to Halifax, you got to turn around with your truck. So here, when you think about logistics, I mean, this is the other thing about, I haven't talked about infrastructure. I hope we can talk about infrastructure, but I mean, when you think about Saskatchewan, you're really in the middle. And when I was leaving Saskatchewan, there were hubs. There were talks about corridors and hubs, and there's no St. Lawrence River out west. You need to be you need to think about logistics on purpose. It doesn't come naturally. Montreal and Toronto were spoiled by nature, not the prairies. You gotta build. And every time I watch the news, there's a spill, a train that derailed, and it's just, you can't do that. You need, and of course there are labor disputes that aren't helping. And you know, with the railway for 4 days in the summer, I mean, farmers can't feed the world if you have a logistical system that can be reliable. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to something that you said in your opening statements, do you think that Saskatchewan struggles to recognize our position of importance and leadership on the international stage? I study energy policy, so I know when it comes to things like carbon capture and sequestration, that there's maybe not that recognition that Saskatchewan is actually a world leader on that stage, but especially here in the local context. But I'm wondering if it's similar when it comes to agriculture in that aspect.
Well, it depends who you talk to, I guess. Some people do recognize it, but I would say that I lived in many parts of the country. I think Saskatchewan is just simply misunderstood. People just think, well, at some point we made Canada, we just draw a couple of lines in the middle, and here we go. And people don't think more about, you know, Saskatchewan's contribution. They laugh at it. It's funny. But at the end of the day, when you look at the economics, I mean, a lot of things are happening. So, no, I've been overseas, and it's funny because I don't think Canadians treat Saskatchewan the same way as people overseas dealing in ag and food and research. Because when you go in Europe, and I'm going to be back in next month, and people know Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
But you go to the GTA, people don't know Saskatchewan.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That's very true. Yes, absolutely.
Who the hell is Brad Wall?
They seem to know the Rough Riders. I don't know.
The Rough Riders, yeah. They don't know the melons, though. They don't know the melons.
Yeah.
I tell them about the melons. Yeah.
Is that considered food wastage? I don't think so.
No.
We're not going down
No.
that path tonight.
For the riders, no.
So yeah, that's very interesting. And I think in Saskatchewan, and I lived here my entire life, and I'm old enough now to be of the generation where my grandparents were farmers, and their families had family farms, and my parents both grew up on farms and then transitioned out of that lifestyle. And we watched those grain elevators longer became these landmark symbols on our horizons. And I wonder, do you think that there is a generational shift in Saskatchewan, and in particular with how agricultural is viewed as something that is important to us culturally?
Well, there was a divide. I mean, the rural-urban divide exists everywhere. And when I was teaching here, it did exist in Saskatchewan, to my surprise, actually, because when I moved here, I thought, oh, all the kids know agriculture. Not so much. I mean, urban centers are urban centers in Saskatchewan. So there is that misconnection. And the reason why it worries me so much from a policy perspective is that as soon as you foster that rural-urban divide, you get bad policy, you know? And we have an urban-centric government in Ottawa right now. And, you know, when you have an urban-centric government, you tend to see decisions that really, you know, undermine the value of the work being done in rural Canada. It's politics are really cruel against rural Canada because there are no votes, but their contribution is so immense. I mean, Bill C 293, which I called it the Vegan Act. It's not really that, but it's the Pandemic Preparedness Act. And I'm sure most of you have never heard about it. I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't heard of Bill C-293, and it's in second reading at Senate. It went through Parliament like butter. Boom. Section L, Bill C-293 states that to prepare for a pandemic, we need to de-risk animal production. Okay? I'm kind of using my own words here. But what I'm about to say next is exactly what's in the bill. We need to also promote alternative proteins to Canadians. Okay? And pandemic preparedness, and I'm sure that most of you have no problem seeing a government prepare for the next pandemic. I think it's absolutely responsible to do that. But when you think about a government potentially, influencing how we eat and what kind of proteins we eat, it's really frightening, because I believe in protein democracy. And this is probably one of Saskatchewan's greatest contribution when it comes to proteins. You can grow a lot of things. You can produce a lot of things here in this province. Similar to Manitoba, I would say. Lots of things are going on. Because of the soil, the richness of the soil here, you can grow many crops within 100 miles. Not many places in the world you can do that. And many types of proteins. Murad understood that many, many years ago. And that's how he built his empire called AGT. And you got livestock as well. And livestock is part of the ecosystem we need to nurture all of that.
Right.
So you want to be vegan? Great. That's great. And choice is great. But as a government, you can't impose diets and regimes. And I feel sometimes that Ottawa, it goes too far.
Yeah, that's a very insightful, and I think there's very much this, I think, sentiment, and a lot of certainly what I've studied with public perceptions of energy is this all or nothing binary thinking, either one way or another, instead of recognizing those multiplicity of differences and those many different shades that are in between. And certainly, I think we learned during the pandemic that there's limitations to actually enacting a policy and expecting people to react that way, that it ends up with these situations that are not ideal. So I think that one of the things I think that's really interesting about the vegan conversation is that it does get positioned in climate change as being the ultimate solution. Just if everyone just stopped eating meat, then everything would be fine. But that isn't a realistic goal, and it also it's getting away from the ability to eat less meat and to have more, diversify our protein democracy, which I think is a brilliant term. And I think that really it speaks to this idea that things they're not one way or another, and that's not a practical way of doing policy.
We estimate there's about 875,000 vegans in Canada. And that number is slowly growing. But I actually do think that that movement has made a really interesting contribution to this whole issue of proteins. I personally thought that things got boring at the meat counter. With the meat trifecta, what's on sale this week? Beef? Okay, beef. What's on sale? Pork, chicken. Beef, pork, chicken. And then came Beyond Meat about 5-6 years ago. And despite a questionable strategy, I really felt that it invited Canadians to think differently about proteins. And when I say to cattle producers, and I spoke to them, and I'm speaking in the 2 weeks in Saskatoon to hog producers, you want that. You want citizens to engage in debates around proteins, regardless of what they want to eat. You want, because they'll value what you're doing, and they'll actually try to understand your contribution to their plates.
Right.
And not just say, food is no longer a zero-sum game. This stomach share mentality needs to end as soon as possible. If you go into someone's stomach, doesn't mean that the other guy loses. That's not how it works anymore. A lot of people think like that still. But food is no longer a zero-sum game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things I remember you mentioning today when we were having lunch that it was that sometimes there's areas where disagreement's inevitable, where you're not, it's that even that trying to go for agreement isn't necessarily the goal because it's just not an achievable goal, and that's focus on that and reaching agreement is not really the right one. And I think with our topic today with science and innovation policy, that is something that is really important to remember, that when we share in our knowledge, we share in our differences, that's when innovation fosters. So bringing it back to food, what do you, first of all, I've one silly question, which I'm burning to ask, which I'll kind of sidetrack. What is your favorite food? I must ask this. But I don't take the chance to ask the food professor. Your favorite
What's my
food?
favorite food? Thank you.
Okay. See, I apparently have to read this.
You
This-
had to ask. I wrote a Don
I'm not
Quixote.
disappointed by that answer. That is fantastic.
But I miss those pierogies though.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah.
My sister growing up was the pierogi princess. So she was a picky eater growing up, and her main food groups were like mashed potatoes, pierogies, and ice cream. I was the kid that ate everything, and it was not picky. But she later on became vegan, and I'm now somebody, I love steaks. So you don't really know where people are going to end up. But I think it too, when you think about just the attachment that people have to political to perceptions over food, it's something that has been with us our entire lives.
yeah.
I have an 8-year-old daughter that's very picky. Her main food groups are grilled cheese and chocolate and Nutella, and it's almost embarrassing, but she will grow up. My favorite, I really like steak. I have to say that if I had to pick just one thing to trump it all, but yeah, I really, yes. Well, muffins, sushi, I've got a lot of different, a diverse palate. So yeah,
Good stuff.
yeah, absolutely. But I think it's when you,
I mean,
it's not something that we
the thing
can
about
control
policy
about
these
somebody.
days, sorry to
No, it's all
interrupt,
good.
but what really upsets me at times when I go to Ottawa, or I was in Quebec City a couple of weeks ago, is that politicians and policymakers tend to forget that food is about culture. Food is about traditions. Food is personal but shareable. It defines who we are. We make choices several times a day in terms of what we're going to eat. Our beliefs, our values, our constraints. I mean, all of these things will impact our choices every single day. And often when you go to Parliament, they treat this as some sort of mission that we need to all of a sudden show them the food guide and say, this is what you need to eat from now on, avocados and almonds. Do we grow almonds in Canada? Do we grow avocados? Oh my God. The food guide, so the food guide basically is 5 years old this year. Did you know that? 5 years old. So it is the most downloaded document the federal government actually produces. Well, actually, the second most downloaded. What's the first? T4. That's right.
Good job.
Taxes. And the food guide is, I look around the room, of course, and we all learn the 4 food groups, and that the drink and choice is milk. Well, was milk. It's no longer the case. It's water, and there are no longer 4 food groups. So we have proportions. Half that plate is our vegetables and fruits, because we all can afford to eat vegetables and fruits all the time, right? All the time. I actually asked Health Canada. So they came to Dal to present their food guide in nutrition. So nutritionists are going, oh my God, it's perfect, it's great. And from a scientific perspective, the food guide is perfect. But it's not Canadian. It's not Canadian. And then I asked the question to Health Canada, so is the food guide more expensive than the old one? Do you know what the answer was? We don't know. Guess what happened next? We were asked to do the math for them. And guess what? The old food guide was indeed cheaper. Overall, depending on the season, because you had proportions versus groups, so it was a bit complicated, but overall, the old food guide was cheaper, more affordable. And from a food security perspective, that matters. So you have Health Canada saying, this is what you need to eat, folks. And you have Ag Canada saying, this is what we're growing, folks. And these are the policies we support, including supply management, by the way. which supports dairy, and there was basically no dairy in the new guide. So you got these two-headed dragon firing each other off, and at the end of the day, you got confused Canadian.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
absolutely.
kind of what we're seeing right now. No vision.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's,
You don't have to agree with me.
well, I do. I do. And yeah, as I see it, I encourage disagreement, but when it's,
I'm too close
it's
to him. I have
something
to
that
agree.
yeah, no, definitely. I definitely agree with that. It's actually, it's interesting because throughout my lifetime, I remember so many different different food guides coming out with different things here and there. And I've struggled with like allergies to like lactose and things throughout my life. And it was always like, well, okay, what do I do then? And I remember powdered soy milk. Like, my gosh, I'm glad that those like plant-based milks have come a long way since then, because it's been really important. But yeah, there's not a one size fits all model when it comes
We're
to
all different. We all
nutrition.
have different needs. We all have different tastes, and that's okay. And that's how the more you recognize how heterogeneous a market is, the more you allow innovation to filter through. Like gluten-free. I don't know if any of you actually need gluten-free, but about 10 years ago, gluten-free products were disgusting. I mean, they were not good. Today, because of innovation, because of research, because of food science, they're actually edible. You know, it's actually, some of them actually taste, they're expensive, yes, but some of them actually have gotten much better because we've recognized that some people have celiac, and so we
Yeah.
need to service them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yes. And in Saskatchewan, so we have a smaller population base, and it is a bit more challenging to find some of the specialty bakeries and aspects that you have in
Same in
large
Nova
urban
Scotia.
centers. But we do have this incredible agricultural community, and the topic today is from farm to fork. So in that context, as we're looking at going into the future and increased urbanization, one of the questions that was submitted ahead of time with registration, I thought was an interesting one. And I am very future focused in my research. I actually study science fiction and apocalyptic storytelling and all these very fun, interesting things. So I liked this question. And this question, I want to pose it to you now. We'll have the chance before we open it up to everyone else. But how do you think urban farming fits into the food production models in the future? And do you see unregulated producers participating in this model?
Urban agriculture, well, so I do value the educational aspect of urban agriculture, but I suspect that the question is more about capacity and producing for chains. And so, I mean, there's a good example of urban agriculture happening right now in Canada. It's called True Leaf, based out of Guelph. It actually started in Nova Scotia, moved to Guelph, and now they're building a facility in both Montreal and Calgary in partnership with McCain Foods. And it's a tough go. I mean, the CEO was on my podcast, Bruce Mucci, and you need capital, lots of capital, and you can't really, the margin of error is very, very slim. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can be underwater pretty quickly. And I've written a few case studies in the GTA when I was in Guelph, and went and interviewed a bunch of executives for 2 projects, and within a year, both of them closed. One of them closed because of a food recall at Loblaw, and the other one just closed because they had some issues with soil, and it's pretty complicated. To get it right, it's very complicated.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people out there who don't believe it. So vertical farms, that's not that. There's no future in that. I'm on the fence. It really depends who you hire, what's your strategy. Like the McCain play to me was a big one because McCain understands markets. I remember when I was in Saskatchewan, I don't know if you guys remember Natural Valley Farms in Indian Head. After Mad Cow, I was here for Mad Cow. After Mad Cow, Natural Valley Farms started as a federally licensed abattoir. And I did a case study on that. It is published. And it was clear that I don't want to say they didn't know what they're doing, but they had to rewrite the food safety book for for abattoirs like that, because they don't open them all that often. So they had to do that, and they made a bunch of mistakes on the design. The geopolitics were unpredictable, and all of a sudden borders open, and ranchers were preferred to actually sell to the US. There was more money instead of just selling to natural farmers. They had no products, and then they ended up slaughtering horses for a while, if you remember. I mean, it can get really ugly, and they closed. My diagnostic of natural by farmers was good intentions from ranchers. They really want, and they had support from the community, but they didn't understand how to connect with the consumer. And so dealing with Sobeys and Loblaws, and if you understand them, you know that it's not easy to deal with them.
Right.
And so Good Leaf or True Leaf, that's the connection they have with McCain.
Oh,
So I'm
okay.
not overly concerned that they'll be able to market their products. So microgreens and salads, leafy greens and microgreens. So
Right.
yeah.
Interesting. All right, I'm going to ask one question that came into us from the online submissions, and we'll talk a little bit more. But I do want, if you have a question, you can like start lining up at the mic, and we're going to turn it over to audience questions right away. So I want to ask this question too, because and there's others too that I can interject, because we do have other questions that were submitted with registration that are great, but I want to make sure that we have the interactive conversation here right now too. So what are the external factors influencing the agriculture in Saskatchewan at a global level that are also internal challenges faced by organizations such as food clusters who want support?
Well, it's logistics. To me, it's a big one. We're not. So in 2022 in Ottawa, there was a task force on logistics, on supply chains, which we participated. The co-chair was Jean Gattuso, was the former CEO of Lassonde Juices, and he invited me to be part of the task force. It was actually, if you could look, you can look it up. It's actually on the Transport Canada website. I thought it was a great report, but nobody read it. So when the railway strikes happen and everything else happened this fall, and I mean, it was all in there. Like 2 years ago, we presented to the Minister of Transportation a roadmap to better logistics in Canada, and everything, 38 recommendations, all of them were overlooked. And so we're doing the work, but it's not a priority. And if you actually set up a food policy in Canada, you're automatically going to have to think about distances and logistics. So
Right.
that's certainly one that I would probably mention.
Right. Yeah.
As a threat or as an obstacle. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. So I want to make sure we get lots of interactive opportunities. So I will go ahead and open it up to all of you here today and online to ask your questions to Dr. Charlebois.
And if you're a student that I failed while I was in Regina, you're not allowed to ask a question. Oh, you're not one of them.
No, I wasn't your student. Sylvain, you mentioned the lack of vision, not only in the province, but in Canada. If the Prime Minister and the 10 premiers and 3 leaders of the territories came to you, if you got them all together in one room and they were cordial, and they tasked you of putting together a vision for Canada and, for that matter, Saskatchewan, what would that be in your view?
I would have real conversations about food autonomy, so producing more food. And an example in this province right now, there's a farmer. He's well known. I'm sure most of you know him. We're going to be they're going to start to produce vegetables in the province to supply Sobeys and Loblaws, the big players. You need to think more about that. Greenhouses. So food autonomy would be a focus. I'm just talking about themes here, not specifics, but themes to answer your question, Larry. Market access. So logistics, trade deals. Kill Bill C-282, which would provide immunity to supply management. Because it may just be supply management, but that's going to be detrimental to all of agriculture in Canada. And so, and not be afraid to disagree, but having a vision is not necessarily to pick winners and losers, but it's actually to set a path forward without excluding everyone. But I do think that right now we're just trying to do so many things, but we're not strategic about anything.
Will that help us in Europe and Asia and throughout? Because the vision has to be worldwide, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, well, we were talking about threats. I mean, I think our biggest problem is the United States of America. I mean, our farmers are constantly hit by diplomatic entanglements with China and India, and we're always stuck in the middle because we want to be friends with the US, but at the same time, the US is, we're seeing it, doesn't matter who wins the White House, we're likely going to see a very protectionistic tone coming out of the White House. One will probably be louder than the other, but we're looking at a more nationalistic world economy. How can Canada cope with that? That's a big concern that I have. And so instead of just playing nice constantly with the United States at all costs, I think we have three major trade deals with North America, Europe, and Asian Pacific, we're the only country in the world with three major continental trade deals. We should take advantage of that.
Okay,
Does
thank
that
you.
answer your question?
Nope. You're a politician.
I'm a professor.
Thank you very much for your comments. I guess what I've heard a lot this evening is a lot of international export-driven agriculture. And what I'm looking at is much more on an internal substitution model for agriculture. I guess I'm not sure whether you're aware there's a 1,000-meter greenhouse in Alberta right now. It's a passive greenhouse. It doesn't use any electricity at all, doesn't use any heat at all. And yet it's producing 30,000 pounds of vegetables a year.
Where is it?
In Olds, Alberta.
Olds, okay.
And if you're talking cost-wise, the actual greenhouse itself cost $250,000. So it's not necessarily small, but it's, if you think of, some of those big tractors, you're looking at 800,000 just for the tractor, never mind the other costs. So I'm just wondering, with that type of a model, why either hasn't it been duplicated a lot of places? Because I could see it happening in small towns.
Mhm.
You've got grocery stores that are closing down. Well, here's a way to provide free, the food for the grocery store. You've got First Nations would love to be able to develop their own agricultural market, as well as, and like I said, if we could do it, not necessarily perhaps with, Sobeys or Loblaws, but with the small towns. I'm just wondering whether either why it hasn't happened and what could spur it on.
And it's a great question. I mean, community-oriented projects are really critical, again, to address this urban rural divide. Yeah, because if you get people to grow their food, they'll understand it's a lot of work.
Well, and the other thing is you can hire your own kids, and you can, your local towns and all
Cheap
that.
labor.
Well, you still have to pay the minimum wage, but still.
Yeah, no, I understand.
They work, and the other thing is you get away from this problem about railway strikes, seaway, all the international blockages in the systems
Yeah.
that we tend to, now kind of may not mean you can have cantaloupe in February, but
Mhm.
maybe you can get some that are a little more intensive and actually grow.
We, for the city of Halifax, we were hired to look at urban agriculture for the city. The city of Halifax has about a population of about 500,000 people. And, but it's a huge city. It's 100 kilometers square kilometers. It's huge. So there's lots of space that is underutilized. And so we were asked to basically map, do some spatial mapping for the city and see where we can grow certain things. So we actually did a survey with residences and asking them what they're growing and because you have to understand what you're growing and what works, what doesn't work. And with COVID, a lot of people started to garden. The gardening rate in 2021 went through the roof everywhere in Canada. And it went back down again the following year because people realized that gardening is a lot of work. You want tomatoes, but you gotta, make sure you understand where the sun is and how much water you need, and if the soil is right and all that stuff. And so we tried to get all that data for the city so they can come up with strategic areas where they could actually set up community gardens, but also have citizens just borrow their lawn for others to grow food if they didn't have space themselves.
Yeah, we've been trying to do a little bit of that in Regina. I know that there's areas, for those in Regina know it, is the Taylor Field area in the yards.
Oh, yeah.
You've got this big open space that's been vacant for
Yeah,
10
it was
15
there, yeah.
years, and direct access to the sunlight, no problems at all.
and I know there's an election for the city as well, so I don't know if it's been debated at all. But so I've been talking mostly at the federal level and to a certain extent the provincial level. But what we're talking about here is more the role of municipalities to get people more engaged, and they have a role to play for sure.
For sure. Unfortunately, they're not really doing much on that right now. So
That's too bad. Thank you.
I have one question that's kind of ties in, but not like it's different, but it feeds maybe off of that. Pardon the pun, but that I from the online questions. And I just want to interject quickly before, and then we'll go back to the questions here in the room. But considering that the majority of agri-food commodities produced in Saskatchewan are destined for export to feed the world, quotation emphasized, and are not locally used resources, thus under limited local decision-making, do you see these commodities as prime candidates for open access exploitation? And can this explain the high level of natural environment and resource degradation from the focus on system simplification and high yields at the expense of system diversity and
Quick answer, no, I don't see that. I think there's the commodities will always exist. And I think we need commodities to make sure that global food security is maintained, I think. But at the same time, like we just talked about local agriculture, that's certainly a big that we can see a major contribution there,
right?
From those initiatives. So it's not this or that.
Yeah.
Because right now, and I had lunch with a major investor in Saskag here in the province, and he's in that game. But others could actually play a different role to diversify the market.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't really see that as a problem. Yeah.
Okay.
So the bungees, the ADMs, the dry fish, I think they really help farmers make money, and that should be embraced.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Okay, back over to the floor.
Hi, thanks. Great talk. I come at this from a healthcare stream, and I'm looking at it from we're doing a lot of research, and there's a lot of innovation and a lot of policy debate around personalized medicine. The idea of genetic testing, AI, and how that's all going to play into medicine as it moves forward, and healthcare as it moves forward.
Yeah.
So when we look at it from a food security standpoint or from a nutrition standpoint, how do you think that'll play into the common culture and what will actually happen if we're looking at, again, you comment on the movement of the middle class and the downgrade of the middle class and the challenge of making sure they're fed properly, that we're all fed properly. And how do you think that plays in from a personalization, a nutrition personalization standpoint, and maybe even the loss of what you comment on the joy we find in food? Maybe. or
Yeah.
the culture we find in food.
AI is I mean, right now you go to a conference and that's all they talk about, AI.
AI.
You know,
Yeah.
if there's no talk about AI, it's not a conference right now.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's overdone a little bit, but
Yeah.
at the same time, I actually do see this as a really big deal as well. It's like the internet in the 80s. I mean, when it came into our lives, we didn't really understand what is happening, but I actually do see AI transform our lives and transform the industry. Now, the reality in agri-food is that AI has been used by consumers and farmers for many, many years already. I mean, it's not new. It's going to be perfected. But if you go into manufacturing, there's a clear deficit there, technological deficit, including the lack of AI. And AI, to me, it's all about optimizing everything you do. It's about understanding the consumer before the consumer knows what he or she wants. We've been using AI at the lab for, I mean, since we've been forecasting. We forecast with AI. I mean, that's the Canada's Food Price Report is AI. And we love AI, but there are dangers. For example, you got to trust the machine. You know, if the machine tells you that broccoli is going to be up 15% next year, are you going to believe it? You know, because Guelph, so starting next week, I meet Guelph, Saskatchewan, and UBC. They all come in with data. They all use machine learning. My job is to know which one I'm going to believe. And that's the forecast you see in the media.
Yeah.
So it's a tough call, you know? So you can't extract the humanity of the decision-making process. Even with AI, AI complements humans. So how do you actually make sure that food systems actually get optimized by using AI? Well, we're in that process right now. I do think like one easy fix or easy thing that I anticipate is dynamic pricing. But I bet you that most people in this room hates dynamic pricing because it's referred often as surge pricing. You see, that's AI. If nobody wants bananas that day, by 3 o'clock, they should be like at 10 cents. If everyone wants bananas, it's okay if you charge $1, supply and demand. So a product can actually change prices 20 times a day. So you optimize your retailing, you reduce waste, you reduce costs. No brainer. But you gotta get consumers to buy into this thing. Everything, and this is really what's missing. A lot of things have happened in this province in agriculture without that social contract. And I think AI is that we're about to see. So GMOs. I don't know if anybody has any problems with genetic engineering. I don't, but I can understand why people do. Because in the 1990s, we decided to give this technology, this beautiful technology, to farmers without telling consumers. Of course, they're rejecting it. Of course, they're concerned about it. We've never taken the time to educate. I was actually at Monsanto in St. Louis a few years ago with my good friend René Van Acker, who's a plant scientist. We asked the CEO of Monsanto before it got bought out. We asked him, why didn't you consult? Why didn't you reach out to consumers to explain what you were doing? And the answer he gave us, well, the science speaks for itself. And the reality, it doesn't. So with AI, don't make that mistake again. We should make sure that people know what's going on. And right now, there's a lot of things going on in the food industry nobody knows about. So,
thanks.
Hi.
Hello, my name is Joe Widup. I farm southeast of here, about an hour and a half. Originally in the supply managed dairy business growing up, and now we broadacre grain farm. And yeah, the AI thing is real. I spent most of today in a sprayer with cameras, and it uploads video for the AI to do pattern recognition and plant recognition.
Yeah.
So it's here. It's not useful yet, but we're hoping. We're hoping.
You're hoping one day.
Yep. And my question from the ground floor on this is, we're seeing added requirements added onto our business practices or agronomic practices as a whole. Usually by the likes of the European Union that wants to restrict trade in palm oil, and then the canola gets caught. And I guess we've seen this come through a couple of different angles, but the countries that don't have food security issues are creating problems for us, which could roll downhill, not to the middle class or poor here, but to the poor in the rest of the world. So how do we push back or make that, or get them to realize the problem that they're causing?
The countries, you mean?
Yeah, well, the countries are, and some of it's non-tariff trade barrier, and you're never going to get rid of that. But there is things like the biofuel mandates and the and we're doing that here to some extent with the clean carbon or clean fuel standards.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're innocent on this whole process, but my concern is this is going to trickle down to the rest of the poor world that needs the food that we provide.
Yeah. No, it's
So-
a good, and by the way, the food insecurity level in Canada is at 22.9%. It's the highest it's ever been. You know what it is in the United States? 13.9%. Just down south of us. We have a
why?
problem. So when you say poor countries, I don't know if you include Canada or not. But right now, I'm on the fence on that one. I'm not even being cynical. I wish I was, but it's just I'm concerned, like, about the middle class for sure. Now, what should we do? I just think we need to start being consistent here about our policy. And I'll give you one example of how really weird things can become in Ottawa and in Ontario and other places. So if you didn't know this, so there was a baby formula shortage in Canada for a while, right? Any mothers and fathers out there that probably drove miles and miles to get baby formula? Well, it was a reality for a lot of families. So Canada doesn't produce baby formula. It's all imported, okay? But that changed a few weeks ago. We do now have a plant in Kingston, Ontario. You can look it up. It's called Canada Royal Milk. Now, Canada Royal Milk is owned by the Chinese. Okay? Canada Royal Milk was built for about $284 million. We, as in Ottawa, provided a subsidy of about $30 million to build that plant. Queen's Park, so the government in Ontario gave $24 million to the Chinese to build that same plant. Okay. Now, this plant now processes Canadian milk for Canadians and actually makes baby formula now. My question to you, or to us, I guess, why isn't that plant Canadian?
Yeah.
Why? We know why. You used to be in dairy, you said?
Yep.
You know why.
Oh, supply
We do.
management, and then
Supply
Supply-
management
supply
is a
and demand.
wonderful thing,
Hmm.
but it's being abused. It really doesn't allow a sector to innovate and vertically integrate. So that myopia that we created because of obsession for marketing boards, has allowed the Chinese to actually build a plant in our own backyard to feed our kids. And I'll go even further, Fairlife, Coca-Cola, build a plant in Peterborough to do the same thing with the technology that should have been developed in Canada. Lactose-free milk. So when I see those kinds of things, I go, what is going on here? Like that should have been Canada.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that plant in Kingston, okay, is about to export products out of Canada with Canadian milk. And we just gave $5 billion to dairy farmers because we signed free trade deals. That is not being consistent. And China got $50 million from Canadian taxpayers, while China actually boycotted our canola and pork because of the Huawei incident 5 years ago. Beautiful, very consistent. That needs to be fixed. If we can actually do that, when we travel around the world, we'll be treated seriously.
Yeah, consistency is important, and thank you. My peer group on Twitter definitely appreciates you and your involvement and your podcast.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you very much.
I'm going to interject with a very quick question that from our online friends, and that's a little bit more open-ended. So what are some of the recent important trends that have shaped the agriculture in Saskatchewan, and in what way?
Like in the last 15 years, or
They didn't specify, but sounds like a good
Well-
time frame to me.
I think pulses are an obvious, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And of course, the research in plant science and traits, I think is also a big one as well. The science going into agriculture has made a huge difference for our farmers. It's the quiet hero for farmers.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay, great. I want to make sure I didn't leave that one out. That's a
Yep.
great answer. Okay. Go ahead.
Welcome home, Sylvain,
Thanks, Gerhard. My former neighbor, by the way.
and my wife Donna over there.
Yeah.
Going back to greenhouses. Outside of Saskatoon, there on a farm, there is a gentleman, I think his website is called Arcopia. He has built, I believe, a greenhouse that is highly sustainable. And in light of that, would you have any more inside details of greenhouse development in Saskatchewan, especially in rural areas? Like just commercial or maybe small time development, like where we can grow, like this gentleman outside of Saskatoon, he's growing bananas. Bananas. Now, it's obviously very small, just two or three plants, like big plants, but he did, it's an actual banana tree and a massive amount of bananas on one stem.
Oh, nothing is impossible. Yeah.
Yes,
I mean, I do see a day when Canada will produce cocoa and coffee.
mhm,
Why not? In a lab. Cellular agriculture is another thing. I mean,
mhm.
I don't know if you knew this, but Health Canada just approved dairy proteins made in a lab.
Yeah, this greenhouse, I can't remember the exact size, but it'd be probably about 40, 50 meters by 10, 15 meters.
Right.
And he spent, the last that I know, probably about $18,000-$20,000 on it.
Okay.
But it's a highly technical,
What kind of energy does he use?
passive, like he uses very, very little heating. He has, it's very detailed, like for example, half of the floor, which is cement, is painted white. The other half, I believe it would be the back side of the greenhouse would be painted black, so that in the winter, the lower sun rays would go in
Mm.
and heat. And then I believe along the back of it, he has barrels of water which get heated up during the day, and then it warms, the heated up water would warm it at night. And he uses fans and probably solar panels. But he has used it's very interesting.
Yeah, I believe in greenhouses. I think there is a future for
Mhm.
greenhouses in Saskatchewan and elsewhere. I know that USask actually had a project for up north as well, with
Mm.
greenhouses.
Mhm.
And so I was actually in Elmira, Spain this summer. And if you know the Elmira story, you would know that it was a desert before. I mean,
Mhm.
there was just nothing 40 years ago. And now they have 380 kilometer square of greenhouses
Yeah.
owned by about 10,000 farmers. It's a
Yeah.
co-op, and they
Mhm.
feed Europe.
Mhm.
Europe. So it's incredible. When you fly into Elmira, you think it's like you just see white. And then as you approach, you realize there are greenhouses. It's incredible. They got together, they got organized, and the climate is very different, obviously,
yeah.
than Saskatchewan, but still, it's not just one company. It's thousands of farmers that got together and they work together and they grow. And so it's all greenhouses.
So do you think it'd be better for a co-op or more individuals owning such facilities instead of government or large corporations?
Co-ops then tend to do well
Mhm.
when it comes to volatility and risks, and there's a research chair at the University of Saskatchewan on co-ops. I think it's the only one in Canada, by the way.
Mm.
Yeah, Murray Fulton, my friend, actually used to. I don't know who actually has that now. Yeah, there you go. So co-ops. Yeah.
I think we might have, thank you so much. I
Yeah,
think we
thank
might
you.
have time for one really, really fast question because I don't want to cut you off, and a very fast answer, and then we'll conclude for tonight.
Sure. I wanted to bring the conversation back to what you started with, talking about carbon. We know that there's big emission targets set for Canada, a 30% reduction from fertilizer emissions. And we know that Saskatchewan has a huge potential given that the amount of farmers who adopted minimum and low-till practices. I'm wondering, what do you see as kind of the necessary policy mechanisms and market mechanisms to help us meet our carbon targets in terms of developing carbon markets? The Auditor General came out with kind of a bit of a scathing report of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's programming around climate policy. And I'm wondering, what kind of vision do you see in needing to go in that direction? Thanks.
I'm more. I have to provide a quick answer.
Yeah.
So I'm not a fan of the carbon tax, and I know it's efficient. It's low cost. I'm more of a cap and trade kind of person. I do think, and Quebec has it, and I see the difference, and their emissions are dropping, and people are happy. They're not miserable like in Saskatchewan. No, I'm just kidding, but I mean, they have. I do think that if you cap and trade empowers companies and farmers to deal and understand the power of carbon currency. Carbon tax is just a stick. At least cap and trade, you give a chance for companies to really adjust. And if they want to pollute, they pollute, but pay. You know, if you want to drive a Hummer, fine, but pay. That's great. But if some companies actually do want to make a difference, that's great. It's the other thing is the accounting. Like there's a lot of greenwashing going on right now. Now I'm not going to name any companies, but there are a lot of, oh, we're net zero. Sure you are. And that makes a lot of people feel skeptical. So the accounting part needs to be really looked into to assess exactly how green we are. And I think that we're greener than we think. So we're richer than we think.
Well, that's a wonderful note to end tonight's lecture and this wonderful interactive Q&A session too. So I want to first start off by thanking you, Dr. Charlebois, for your insight from today's presentation. This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation and a really great opportunity to have you here today to ask these questions and to learn from your expertise in this area. I want to thank all of you for attending today and for those of you online for joining us for the Robertson Lecture. I'm as a Robertson Fellow, it's really incredible to see this as our first in-person lecture and to see the success of it. And I want to also once again remind you that this lecture is going to be, it was recorded and it will be posted on the JSGS website once it's been edited, so you can watch everything again and learn once more over. And you can also check out the JSGS website to hear about upcoming lectures at www.schoolofpublicpolicy.sk.ca. And one final note that I hope you enjoyed this presentation. And I also encourage you to join us on October 31st when we will host a post-election discussion with a panel of experts who will analyze the outcome of the 2024 Saskatchewan provincial election. And details for that lecture can be found on the JSGS events calendar. So thank you once again to tonight's speakers, Dr. Sylvain Charlebois and Lorleen Burdell, and to the members of JSGS's Robertson Lecture Committee, made up of Dr. Jim Farney, Keith Comstock, and Jamie Mayo-Bosch, who work each year to select speakers and topics for the series. And thank you to the Robertson family and the University of Regina 50th Anniversary Committee for making this event possible. Last but not least, thank you once again to all of you who joined us tonight, and we hope you found the conversation relevant and interesting. And thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.